we have a bunch of directors here. I have found that directors are the worst. They're the worst when you put them on these things. I've had people on that know better that have been like.
You're allowed to swear though.
Oh, swear, stuff like that. Not a problem.
You can have a potty mouth.
You can.
We encourage it.
Okay, and there we go. Going.
You want music?
Yes, please. You can start.
We'll be a bunch of bobbing heads here in a minute.
Scott, you need to let me in.
Okay. You should be in. Uh-oh. When he has to go. No doppelgangers.
A lot of Shayna. I'm kidding. You can never have enough Shayna.
Get me out of here.
I can remove you, actually. Let me.
Don't remove the wrong one.
I know, that's the thing. Right. Let me know when we're feeling a little bit more comfortable, because I will. Let's see. Shayna. Oh, my goodness. I don't know which one's the right one now.
Is it the one that has...
I'm just going to put one in the waiting room. That's the answer.
I think the one that is...
No video on this one.
I think that's the one that needs to go. I'm not going to touch it.
We'll be there soon.
Which Facebook page is this broadcasting to?
The Women in Horror.
Okay, I'm on that.
I will bring that up right away.
Start the music over?
I'm just starting it live, so yes.
Now it's good.
Okay. Live. Yay. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up for another Hellbent for Horror Takeover, the Women in Horror Film Festival page. We have nothing but fantastic people here today. And let me make sure this sound is off here. I'm grateful to see all you folks out there, and we're going to see about starting this party up. Sorry that we were a little bit late. Technical difficulties, as one might know. When the apocalypse happens, the first thing to go is the infrastructure. And so all three cheers for infrastructure decline. We're on our way to something good. So I did want to introduce the folks that are going to be on our show today. As you can see, we have some quite esteemed folk. We have Dr. Rebekah McKendry, who is a professor of horror, a doctor of horror, which is what I love to say, as well as a director. And her film, All the Creatures Were Stirring, played at the Women in Horror Film Festival, I believe, last year, and is available at this point, I believe, to watch on Amazon, correct?
We're on Shudder.
On Shudder, yes,
yeah.
On Shudder. Thank you so much. And then we have the amazing Izzy Lee. Izzy Lee, a filmmaker and screen anarchist, as I like to say. She has made some fantastic short films, and she is really, I believe, in the book on the top 100 horror women in horror. She's considered one of the great up-and-comers. She's been quoted as that, and I think anybody who's seen her work knows that that is not an understatement. So, Izzy, thanks so much for being on.
Thanks so much for having me. It's very kind.
And we have Shayna Connelly, who's a filmmaker, experimental filmmaker, and also associate professor of film at, I believe it's Purdue, right? Did I get that wrong?
Oh.
DePaul, Purdue, Jesus. DePaul, there we go. At DePaul, and I love your experimental films, as you know, and we have her on here to brighten up the day as well. So thanks so much for being on here, Shayna.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And of course, it's us again. It's me S.A.Bradley and Vanessa Ionta Wright, who does nothing big. She just created the Women in Horror Film Festival out of total cloth. She makes films on the side as well. She's in process of making a Western, nothing small. I'm the guy that just kind of sits here and nods. So Vanessa, how are you doing today?
I mean, I'm just going to have you introduce me everywhere. Like, just even if I go next door, you made me sound amazing.
My new cameo thing, right?
I love it.
I should be on cameo.
Yeah, things are going well. I actually did want to mention one big, huge thing. Dread Central just released the news for us. Love them. They've been really, really supportive of the fest. We have decided to move the dates. I just don't feel like February is going to be safe. I don't think it's responsible to host a live event. And honestly, the magic that happens at WIF is being there in person. So we're going to push it out to June. Hopefully, things will be sort of back to normal by then. At least it'll be a lot safer. And we just really want to continue to curate a phenomenal event for people. And I don't want to cheat anyone of that live experience. So we're moving to summer.
It's awesome, though. Traveling time.
Yes, and there's a pool at the hotel, so who knows what kind of shenanigans we're going to get into.
And instead of pizza, this time we're going to go to that wonderful Marietta Diner and just take that place over, because that place rocks.
We'll watch movies at the theater, and then the rest of the time we should just be at that diner, eating all the food and drinking all the drinks.
So normally when I've talked to all three of you at certain points at either film festivals, email, or on instant message, always great provocative conversations. I love the conversations that I get into with you. So, I mean, I usually start by asking what your first kiss was, which is the movie that as a child ruined you, scarred you, made you go down this terrible path of demise. I think I've asked all of you. If you want to answer that, great. If not, I have something else that I wanted to talk about. Izzy, what do you think?
Yeah, why not? An American Werewolf in London.
Nice.
Was the first film that I can remember watching in just about its entirety, where I would sneak down the hall. I was supposed to be sleeping. My parents were watching it in the other room, and I would hear something crazy and some screams, and I would run down the hall, see it, get scared, flee all the way back, and I couldn't stay away. So I love going back. Scarred for life.
Well, that's kind of the thing that I think is interesting. When I talk about the first kiss, it's like, hey, first kisses don't always go great, but they do kind of addict you because whether they're traumatic or not, you kind of get excited by them. And sometimes you get excited at the theater, you find yourself that, or sometimes it's a communal thing, like you sneaking around your parents. It's almost like, for me, drive-ins were always fun because I was almost like in a projector. Right? I mean, I'm in this thing in a car, but you can get out and you're the big ray of lights going by and you're getting behind the thing. So it always felt like I was part of the movie almost. And do you think that there was something about that moment that made American Werewolf a little bit scarier because it was like forbidden fruit for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was like 5 too.
Oh, nice.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I knew it was something I wasn't supposed to be watching, because you get that like, ooh, that's exactly it.
That for sure has imprinted on you. That's a young age.
And I'm still very strange. I haven't really changed.
Yeah, no.
So,
God bless it. Thank you. God bless the strange. That's what's keeping us together right now. How about you, Shayna?
For me, I had a similar experience to Izzy, but I wasn't quite sneaking around, but it was also on TV. So for me, it was Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which I still really love and have taught several times. It's a deeply strange film masquerading as a ghost story. And I discovered it. I just went downstairs to watch TV. No one was monitoring me. No one cared what I was watching. I was not old enough to watch it either. But it was on TV a lot. So I actually saw it a lot in bits and pieces. And it really had a huge impact on me. And then I didn't see it again for many, many years. And was thinking about it and wanted to incorporate it into a class that I was doing on psychotic women
nice.
in horror. And it's perfect because you don't know if it's a ghost story or if she is mentally ill or if she's being driven crazy.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great, and one of the best soundtracks. That's a great horror soundtrack as well. I go back to that one a lot. When I'm writing, I have this Spotify that's like 20 hours of every possible soundtrack.
Will you share that with us? I want to hear it.
Yeah, I will. I'll put that in the thing.
I want to know what your writing playlist is.
Oh, it's great. You know what's funny is the most soothing ones are like Cannibal Holocaust.
Yeah.
That one is so like, it just lulls you to sleep. And then you listen to the Cannibal Ferox and it's like, I'm discoing, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
But Let's Scare Jessica to Death, it opens and ends with what seems to be the exact same monologue, but there's very specific stylistic differences where words get switched around. It's really, that movie, every single time I watch it, I discover something new. It's just wild.
Yeah, that's a fantastic one. I bring that one up to people who haven't seen certain movies. Like 10 Rillington Place is one that I usually bring up when people are like, oh, well, do you know of any really big actors that were in horror movies? I was like, how about Attenborough? You might enjoy this one. But Let's Scare Jessica to Death is just one of those films. And I can see how that would affect you because of your thing with ghosts, spirits, madness that is in your experimental films. What was I going to say about that?
That's going to go on my list for sure. I am the worst when it comes to this. Scott knows. And if you guys have ever talked to me, I'm like, I've not seen anything. I don't even know what I'm doing here. But that is one of those films that has consistently has kind of been told. And I'm like, I really need, so it's going on the list. I'm watching it soon. I haven't seen it. I'm the one.
It's so dream logic-y. Like it's one that you kind of just like you're drifting through the air the entire time you're watching it. But there is an absolutely beautiful Blu-ray release of it. So I'd recommend doing over whatever jazz is on Amazon Prime.
Yeah. Good call.
All right, Dr. McKendry. And yes, I say doctor a lot because my wife is a microbiologist. She went through the whole thing.
So you have the student loan problem too, right? I'll be paying on that shit till the day I die.
It's a nightmare. It's a living hell. No, we're slightly older, so we finally got underneath that boot from underneath that.
Oh God, my husband's on his second master's. I keep saying, I'm like, that's what our kids are going to inherit from us is like our student loans. That's all.
Yeah.
Freaking nightmare. So
but congratulations. It's no small feat. So congratulations to your wife.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons that I came up and talked to you at, I think it was Texas Frightmare was the first time I actually came up and talked to you. And it was because I had a bunch of my Algonquin roundtable of horror friends, these guys that stay up all night and talk all this stuff. And they were just going, there's Rebekah McKendry. And like, I'm like, what the fuck?
I got a humph. Oh,
yeah, you got a hump.
I got a hump.
And I was like, why are you getting a hump?
There's no penis there.
Yeah.
That's why.
Oh, God damn.
Wasn't it on the right side? What do you mean? No, never mind.
Oh.
A hump. But you got a hump. And I'm like, what? And they're like, she says she's a doctor of horror. There's no such thing, or I'd have it. And I'm like, go fuck yourself. I gotta go talk to somebody now. If they're going to say that, I need to talk to her. Then I was like, that's so awesome. Tell me.
It's a thing. It's a whole thing. I mean, it's not a lot of things, but yeah, it's, yeah. But I mean, I didn't grow up. My parents never restricted anything I watched. I mean, I wasn't allowed to watch porn by any stretch. And they were always really weird about nuclear Holocaust movies. But straight up like horror stuff, like that weird Steve Guttenberg made for TV movie where like all of his hair and teeth fall out. That was off limits. But my parents would have never stopped me from watching a horror movie in any capacity. They were big Star Trek fans, sci-fi fans. And my dad watched nothing but spaghetti Westerns. Nice. And so like I couldn't walk through the living room while he's got like Cutthroat 8s on. And then he's like, no, don't watch that. So they never really limited. So I don't have like a first kiss. I have like 20. So I'm like #film slut, which I'll take. I
love that.
For all it's worth.
It's awesome.
But I mean, like some of the first ones that I remember melting my mind, Jaws did a number on me because we lived, they still do, they live on the Shenandoah River. And so, you know, it's hard to watch that one and then dive. The water like straight off of our dock is 8 feet. So it was well over my head as a kid. And I remember watching that and Piranha. And then just like, I can't get back in after this point. Like, what do I do? Like, I just can't get back in the water. Both those two.
Swimming pools only.
Yeah. Even the swimming, like I remember having problems in the bathtub where I'd be like, I don't know, that weird shape, looks kind of shark oriented. So yeah.
Yeah, or something's gonna come up from the drain and get you.
So yeah, Jaws definitely was a big one to just like melt my brain.
Yeah, wonderfully primal. I mean, that is like, I love that that story, so simple, turns the entire ocean into the bed underneath your bed that you don't want to put your foot over. Everybody, it's universal all the way across the world, that the idea of being afraid of sharks and just this idea of this id thing that's just coming around and eating. Even though when I was young, when it came out, I saw it in the theater, the Feely Theater in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And it was like, we're landlocked, right? There's like a lake and that's it. But people were so terrified of that movie. And I remember that some people were like going, well, it's not Moby Dick. You know, it was like, because it was his first big blockbuster film. It was the first movie that stayed in the theaters for a month. And then it was like, boom. After that, you know, I had Star Wars the entire summer. But people were like, what's the big deal? And the people had the Super Shark shirts in line and stuff. And then you would get in there, not a pin would drop. I remember seeing it in the theater, huge screen. And there's seaweed that hits the lens in the very beginning during the credits, you know, so you're underwater in this thing. And when the seaweed hits the lens, everybody flinched like to the right. And it's like, everybody was that on edge over that film. So
what happened when Ben Gardner's head floated out?
Oh God.
My students still scream. I've used that in my class so many times, and because I always teach it when I teach summer blockbuster, like the blockbuster mentality of horror, the idea of let's take over the season. And it still gets them every time. So it's beautiful to watch. But that one, it really was like a cultural phenomenon. Actually, even just earlier today, I was talking with Lee Winnell came and talked to one of my classes at USC earlier today via Zoom. And I asked him a similar question, like, what's the one that, you know, killed you as a kid? And he immediately held up this massive poster for Jaws. And he's like, this one every time. So it really did something to a lot of people who were like kids seeing it in the 80s and just kind of, having to overcome the fears that brought in. And I love sharks now. Like, I donate money to shark charities. That's my charity of choice, is Save Sharks. But it's a rough one to get through.
I donate to bats. They were one of my big fears when I was.
I love bats so much.
They're so
Bats are amazing because I do not like bugs. I'll respect the bug, but I do not want to interact with any of them ever. And so I appreciate that, you know, the bats eat so many. So I will put I'll take all the bats. They can come here.
Aw.
So we have a lot of people who are online just saying hello. Thanks everybody for being on. And if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in there. We will see about fielding them as best as possible. And I guess it's a good time for me to talk about how we tend to do the rules here. There is the possibility of us actually putting the link for the Zoom on the Facebook page on the comments. We'll pin it there. That'll allow you to come on, but there are a few stipulations. First is the house rules are you must have your video and your audio on. If you come on here, we want to see the whites of your eyes. You decide you're going to say something to us. And also any negging, hate speech, general ass hattery will get you booted from the show. And we've got very, very quick trigger fingers here. And of course, it's as time and everything allows, we'll have you come on. But as of right now, just everybody that's on, thank you so much for showing up with us. And I wanted to talk about, you know, we were talking about horror, how it really affects people culturally. And one of the things that's hitting me now is that I've always been affected by horror on a cultural level. And when I talk with people, I say that horror always talks to the anxieties of whatever generation is there. And it does retranslate as generations go by. But even the movies that are like B movies, the drive-in movies, are culturally literate to what's going on because they need to know what annoys you. They need to know what's offending people to be able to offend. Therefore, it is always, whether it likes it or not, whether the filmmakers, even if they're just going for a money grab, they cannot help but be socially conscious and political. It's just going to happen, whether you are on the side of it, of the pro of what the movie's saying, or if you're not. And of course, I always say, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, you can read that in multiple ways. But we're in a time period right now where I'm hearing what I like to call the Nixon went to China syndrome, which is once Nixon gets kicked out of office, about a year later, people just walk around and do this subliminal thing of, you know, Nixon went to China, like normalizing this guy. And all of a sudden, the narrative started to change by the 80s. Nixon gets a library and all this stuff because he went to China. And that is a way to kind of normalize and dampen an attitude and make it seem like what you were worried about really wasn't a big deal. And what I'm seeing now in horror is people talking how, I'm so tired of these new horror movies. They're all political. Horror films have always been political. You may not be on the right side of the politics that the films are now talking about. But at the same point, I believe that they are always political. What do you guys think on that?
Oh, of course they have been. Yeah. I mean, always. I mean, even just, I was, all the way back to the 1920s. Yep. If you watch a lot of the cinema.
Caligari.
You can see politics and social beliefs at the time, Haxon. Yes. You can kind of see a lot of it bleeding through. And you mentioned like the B movie circuit. That is where a lot of times we see the most powerful voices. If we look at things like Night of the Living Dead was not a mainstream movie when it was made. Even if we drift into the 70s, I mean, a lot of the exploitation filmmakers are making massive political statements. Deathstream, I mean, these are not massive, massive movies. Martin, is making, even talking about Romero, just because he did this repeatedly. I mean, like Season of the Witch, these are all making crazy, crazy political statements. These weren't mainstream movies. Even into the 80s, I mean, like Society. I mean, although I keep hearing that it did like mainstream screenings in other parts of the world, but in the States, that was like a box office, like a video store darling at best. So yeah, I mean, it's always been like that. And it's always been political.
Do you think that there's something, I guess I'll ask Izzy about this, because Izzy, your stuff, there's no getting around that is political. I mean, you have, when you're making like Rites of Vengeance, which I love, because that's, to me, that's like a Ramones song. It's all killer, no filler. It's just, it is what it is. And it pounds through in a couple minutes and you're like, holy shit, that was pretty brutal. And that was pretty amazing. But it also says a lot because you just cut out all the crap and you just go right to this one red hot theme. How do you feel about it? Do you think that it's sometimes the problems that people mix up social issue with political, and people are more prone to dismiss things if they're political as opposed to social issues?
I wish I had a better answer for that, but I don't know, to be quite honest. I think that there's a lot of safety in the white male straight gaze, and there has been for a very long time for a certain segment of the population that has kind of owned horror for most of forever, and I think that there are new voices pushing in, at least lately, and they don't like that because it interrupts their status quo and makes them finally uncomfortable, because we're showing a mirror of what we see as artists in society, and we're saying, this is our problem. Here are the metaphors, but this is what the real problem is. I got into filmmaking purely for political reasons because I just got so pissed off at the state of this country. And that was a film about the whole legitimate rape comment. Mm-hmm. But with Rites of Vengeance, for people who don't know that film, it's a trio of nuns who decide to take out a very, very bad priest, Death Wish style. And that comes from growing up in the Boston area, and it's very, very heavily Catholic here. And I have some friends who were abused by priests. Okay, Spotlight that took place here. They actually filmed a printing press that was my stepdad's press. That he was a foreman there at the Globe for many, many, many years, just running the presses. He wasn't the reporting pool or anything, but like that stuff came up a lot regionally, and the way that the church has handled it through history. And, especially, now where they just keep denying and they moving priests around to different, mm-hmm. Exactly. It made me insane. It made me insane to watch. So I had to exercise it, so to speak, from my own system.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
It is, and I think horror, probably more so than any other genre, lends itself to being able to kind of exercise those things. At least what I've seen, when we talk about it being political and social, I think the genre is almost built for that,
Very Jungian. Very Jungian.
Yeah.
shadow self, where we want to have that handshake, a safe handshake with the shadow. And Jung himself says, hey, you can ignore your shadow self at your own peril. But if you do, who knows what's going to come up? It's going to come up when it wants to. And
It'll bite you in the ass.
Yep, it's going to blow you up. That's when you get internet famous, YouTube famous, and all of that, because you do something absolutely crazy. And I think it's tailor-made, metaphor, allegory, all of that. And that's why, Shayna, you do experimental films. And some people would be like, oh, experimental films, how can you possibly have any kind of motivation politically or socially on such a thing? But I think that horror is so close to experimental film. I think they live in the same area, because it's all about what you're getting from gut, and gut is where it gets to your gut before it gets to your brain. So tell me a little bit about your experiences with experimental and what you've done with that, because your stuff's amazing.
Well, thank you. I'm not exclusively an experimental filmmaker, and actually a film that I made last year is about this conundrum of what is the problem, particularly for women, when you can't classify their work. So I make some experimental work. Quiver at Women in Horror Film Festival won Experimental Horror Award, Lizzie. But it's also played as a narrative film. It's played as a drama. It's played in horror blocks. Mm-hmm. And then I also do documentary work. And so, and all three of those modes are thought of as being having strict boundaries, but they don't. And horror is about breaking boundaries. Yes. And transgressing boundaries. And so experimental work transgresses boundaries in terms of form. And pushes boundaries in terms of form, which lends itself well to horror, especially because horror is not part of the natural world, right? There is always something supernatural about horror cinema, and these, to visualize things in the supernatural world, or also to try to mimic or elicit the feelings that we have for things that are not literal. It lends itself, experimental work, it lends itself to those sorts of expressions, because it's more like poetry. Yeah. A lot of times, not exclusively. There's a huge non-narrative work, experimental work has just as many genres as narrative. And we have less experience seeing experimental work, so we're more used to narrative, so experimental feels weird and odd, and but it can really help, especially in a hybrid mode with narrative and experimental, heighten all those feelings that horror explores.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think what I love about horror is that it is fluid, and what I'm loving about where people are going with horror now is that we may be in the generation that's finally says, labels are kind of silly, and not just on sexual orientation, not just on your religious belief, but even on something as simple as the genre. That genre itself seems to be breaking down. And it's been with us for a long period of time. It just hasn't been acknowledged. Like, you're talking about the different films that you've made, and I'm thinking about how there are moments of Shoah, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a horror movie. There's hours of stuff that's in Shoah that is as horrifying as anything that happens in, say, the opening parts of Deliverance, which has this really dangerous way of looking at people who are quietly aggressive. But there's also Tarkovsky. Just about every Tarkovsky film has at least one scene. And Come and See, which is considered a war film, but that may be one of the most horrifying films I've ever seen.
I teach it in my horror class.
There we go.
Come and See, I include in my horror class. I've used clips from it many times.
Yeah, that's one of my big beefs. I spend a lot of time talking about how we use horror all the time, yet we denigrate horror. That is the mainstream. the mainstream looks at it as if it's a major issue, yet it's constantly the way that it is, that we use narrative. And I don't know how many mainstream films use the tropes of horror to be able to tell their stories in a whole different way. What would you consider a horror movie that no one else considers a horror movie? I'll open that up to all of you.
I tend to be really open with my understanding of a horror movie, so much so that it's annoying to a lot of people.
Same here.
Including my students, where I'm like, today we're studying Requiem for a Dream, which I totally fucking consider to be a horror movie.
Absolutely.
But I tend to be really open with it. The ones where I tend to get the most argument is I look at a lot of kind of revenge movies as horror films. And so I can put it broadly as like some of the South Korean revenge films, like I Saw the Devil.
Yes.
I 100, or even Old Boy, I 100% classify those into horror.
Yeah.
And I tend to get in a lot of arguments with people over those more than any others, that, I will constantly be going down knowing, nope, Lady Vengeance, it's a horror film. No, it's not. But then again, I mean, it's so... I think that the argument of genre, it's been exacerbated by the internet, because we go on Twitter to be angry as shit. And so, we love to sit on there and argue about everything. And so whether or not these movies are a horror movie, we love it. We love doing it. I remember when The Witch came out a couple of years ago, it was immediately like, it's not a horror film. And I'm like, there's a crow picking her, nipple off. I don't know. Musical comedy? I mean, we can go to that route, but what the hell? So yeah, but we love arguing, so go for it.
How about you, Izzy?
I think most rom-coms are fucking horror movies, to be quite honest. They horrify me in their really, really terrible tropes, stereotypical views of both genders. I think and be incredibly damaging to both men and women. And fuck, man, I want no part of most of them, to be quite honest. I'm trying to...
I have said that about Breakfast at Tiffany's. I have a whole thing about Breakfast at Tiffany's.
You think it's horror? Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's horror. It's such an insane, weird, nightmarish fantasy of the worst possible emotions. It's everything about it is selfish, and everything about it is deceptive. And, it's basically the story of people prostituting themselves in all different ways. And yet somehow they're happy about it by the end. And then you have this crazy Mickey Rooney thing that's like some kind of crazy demon that's in the middle of the movie. Yeah, everything about that movie, what makes it even more horrifying is how much people love it, right? I was just watching a Pauline Kael documentary, and she talked about how much she hated the sound of music, that she lost relationships, ended relationships over the sound of music. And she was like, there's nothing more false than this movie. Not one Von Tripp kid wants to stop singing melodies. You've got to be kidding me. Whitewashing of World War II. Went down this whole thing. That's a horror story. But you sit there and you say that. She goes, the sexless Julie Andrews. What is she? She's just teeth. She's
the Barbie that sings really well.
Yeah, teeth and a haircut.
She is the exemplified mother, and that's all it is. Yeah, but yeah, he's into that, so go for it. I love that. I'm from a musical theater background, so that movie gives me warm fuzzies, but I totally get it.
Yeah.
But I think there's probably there are horror versions of just about every movie. Cause I watched, my daughter's obsessed with Frozen, and every single time I watch that movie, I'm like, this is ultimately a universal horror film. The character with powers they can't control has to hold themselves up in some weird castle. Then the villagers show up with pitchforks. It's a universal horror film. I watched Palm Springs a couple nights ago on Hulu. That movie, there's a horror version of that movie. I think that it's fine line.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a David Twohy film that's basically Palm Springs. What was the name of it? It was shot in Hawaii. Insane film. And came out after he had a couple really good ones, Pitch Black and Below or Beneath the German submarine ghost story.
Oh, Below.
Below, thank you. That's it.
Such a good movie.
Yeah, I love that film. It's a great ghost story, and no one talks about it. Oh, speaking of talking, I just
That's
looked at
good.
our chat. John Arminio, long time fan, says, as long as we can stop using the term elevated horror, as if horror wasn't smart or wonderful since Cabin of Dr. Caligari. Yes, drives me crazy that we, and that's the thing about the politics, right? When we
Mhm.
people saying, oh, we don't, like Dr. McKendry, Doctor of Monsters. There's this thing about being smart that for some reason that's a
How
problem.
dare you?
Yeah, how dare you be smart? To say that you're smart, even worse. And horror has always been smart.
Well, I will say, one, you can call me Becca. And two, I will still lose my car keys at least 4 times before the end of the day. And I'm not even driving anywhere right now. So seriously, like, degrees mean nothing, y'all.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying. Like, I think for a long time, the view of horror was kind of like it was trashy. It wasn't intelligent. It's at the bottom. The people who watch it, they can't think. You know, that we're just like these mindless, like, oh, blood. You know, and I think it's the opposite. I think there's really, really intelligent themes and stuff going on in horror, and a lot in subtext that people are not necessarily, the so-called smart people might not be picking up on it, but I think we know better. You know, I mean, we see it, we do it. It is where you can kind of, you know, going back to horror being political. I mean, this is how we're expressing, this is how we're saying, hey, this is the shit that's going on right now, but we hit it in a zombie or a pod person.
Right.
And they're not, but you know, it's the people that consume it and watch it and love it. They get it.
Yeah. Well, it's
know what it means.
half finishing the conversation is where what it comes down to. It's like, yes, horror films are a catharsis and a roller coaster, but what's it a catharsis and a roller coaster from? It has to, the catharsis has to do something. And I think that's something that Carol Clover would talk about. She goes, I'm so tired of people just defending that movie. There's nothing for you to look at here in this movie, folks, except for a good scare. That's all it is. And she's like, no, you're halfway getting to the point. What is it a catharsis for? If your movie is a roller coaster, what is a roller coaster? What is making these hills? What is making these twists?
Well, and Becca, going back to like what you brought up when you said like your parents didn't really censor what you were watching, but they were like, oh, nuclear stuff, no, that was bad. But to me, like, those are horror films. I mean, I was very young when I saw the film Testament.
Oh God, that
it
thing
ruined me. Like,
I was in college watching that. Yeah.
I mean, I had nightmares for a week. I was going to bed crying. I couldn't pinpoint because I wasn't able to really articulate what bothered me so much about it. That is a terrifying film, and it was a made-for-TV movie.
The butt bleeding scene did it.
Oh God, yes!
Yeah, I'm just like, what's wrong with this kid?
And I just
bleeding.
remember the mom brushing her hair, and it's falling out, and she's crying. Like it.
I have
Go
not
watch
seen
it if you
this.
haven't seen it. It's
wow, it's great.
Well, I've
it's
seen-
a horror
It's a
film.
bleak one. Don't
I've
like
seen
watch
Threads.
it and plan to move on
It's
with your day.
dark.
Like
No.
watch it and go to bed and
So
wake up
Threads
happy.
dark.
Just
Oh, yeah.
it's dark.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Threads is
I
the
can
one
take it.
I go to because
Threads is intense.
yeah, that whole thing of just how everybody's dying. You get to meet all these people, and some of them die off camera, shitting themselves behind a door that's laying up against. I mean, it's like, holy cow, this is
It's
insane.
brutal. But Scott, I think you hit one of the nails on the head when you started talking about Carol Clover. A lot of kind of a larger disrespect that I think horror gets when it comes to kind of how intelligent it is goes back to academia and the way that horror has been treated in film schools for eternity. We are just now starting to get a little bit better. And Shayna, I know I can see you've probably got a lot to stay on this as well. But even as I was coming up in the film world, and even now that I'm an academic teaching, I'm still that horror person. I'm the weird one with the tattoos where they're like, oh, you got the horror person as your counselor, or oh, the horror person's your mentor. And I have the students that gravitate and are like, holy shit, yes, you're the reason I'm here for this. And you know, I want to make horror. And then I have the students that are like, I do documentaries. I don't know why I'm with you. And I'm like, oh, this kills me. But even when I came up, this film school I went to, really small film school in Virginia. But even when I would say things like, no, I want to do my report on Suspiria, I would get, no, it's neoclassical Italian realism or it's shit. And I don't think we have moved much past that. I remember when I was writing my master's thesis, I had a professor that kept trying to get me to say the word paracinema instead of horror, and him blatantly telling me that if I referred to it as a horror genre and not paracinema, that it would like knock me down points and like from other people reading it. And we're still like trying to overcome that in academia.
Yeah.
You can trace this back though to Noel Carroll, who wrote The Philosophy of Horror. And the first thing he did that was problematic, which impacted experimental film, was to try to define what a film was.
Yes.
And he put very narrow parameters on what a film was, which is ridiculous because it doesn't account for a medium evolving over time. So for instance, anything 3D cinema, it's a shitty book. It's a really shitty book.
Yep, there it is.
I recommend reading this book. It's also impenetrable language. It's the worst academic language you can.
So many.
Don't even, oh my God, this is some of the bigger problem with academia is that academics feel like they have to write it. Like a dictionary is just flowing out of them, and it makes it inaccessible. For even me, these are impossible to read unless you have like a thesaurus by your side.
So. It'll cost $100
to read it because I don't know all the words. It would be real hard for me.
And it's also how it's worded. So many times in academia, they don't leave an opening of perhaps. The word perhaps isn't there, or might. It's always like, no, that's a penis. What do you mean? What? The shark's a penis. Like, maybe? No, it is. And so you get these things where that even if it's mocked, that has a residue that makes it through the decades. And so a lot of the things that were almost considered jokey still do. And I love what you said about defining horror. Horror is so subjective that it's pointless to try and come up with a strong definition. I go off of the dictionary definition. A definition of horror is an intense sense of fear, surprise, dread, or repulsion. And so a movie that does that, and then I ask the question of why does it do that? Because, Bambi gives you a shock or two, but that's not a horror film. Yet at the same point, there is a reason that of all the different ways that you can tell a story, that director, that writer, the filmmaker said, this is the one that we're going to use. So there is some emotion that they're trying to fill out.
Well, and I think you kind of just said it with it being subjective. I mean, by saying Bambi isn't a horror film, it might be for somebody. We kind of experience
most children.
I mean,
that movie fucked me up.
Yeah.
We'll experience dread and fear from different things. I mean, I guarantee the stuff that gets under my skin would probably not faze some of you. You might be like, hey, but and the opposite is true, so it really is. It's such a personal, obviously I think there's some commonality to certain things that I think just as human beings,
I love that
get us. But yeah, so speaking of Zoom bombs, we got our little kitty here. Is this, you guys got a new kitty during the quarantine? Is this the kitty?
This is the ridiculous tail.
Yum.
I love
kitty cat with a
quarantine
ridiculous
kitty.
Yeah, me too.
Such a great thing. So talking to Shayna, and I'll ask you a little bit more about that, because one of the things that about not being able to get under this this big boulder that's been put on us with horror is the artists also betray themselves. And what I mean by that is you can go all the way back to The Exorcist. When The Exorcist came out and it was up for an Oscar, Friedkin said, it's not a horror movie. He said it was something else. Jaws was a horror movie when it first came out, and then it became a rousing action-adventure film once it was up for Best Picture. And the big one is like Silence of the Lambs, several faces taken off, 2 active serial killers, cannibalism, all sorts of interesting stuff that's going on inside of that film, and just a sense of dread that goes through it. When it came out on Valentine's Day of 1991, it was a horror film. When it was up for 8 golden statues, it suddenly became a thriller, a psychological thriller. And because of its popularity, we had a desert for the 90s of psychological thrillers that were like party medium. They would only go part way over the hump of horror and always tried to desensitize it. Why do you think we buy into it?
It's a great question.
I don't know that we do buy into it, or at least not a modern audience. I mean, there's always been a really strong contingent of horror fans who've spoken for the genre. And especially a modern audience, I think this is changing a lot. And it should too. You talked about it earlier, that not everything is binary, and we're more aware of that now than we were. But even going back to Noel Carroll and after he tried to define film, he tried to define horror. And as anyone who's studied any sort of genre over time knows, that genre conventions change as the needs of the audience changes, and that as the needs of the filmmakers change as they're exploring different things. And I think it's more common now that we accept that as true, and that we see, with the one thing the internet has done positively is to, we know that things have changed over time. We know that how a film was framed has changed, or it changed when the film was being considered for an award. And you can see those things and see right through them, I think, a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to agree with that completely, that we are seeing this mass change in audience that is not willing to accept it quite like, we were a couple of decades ago. And even just like, I started at Fango when I was in my early 20s as an intern. And at the time, I would go to these horror conventions and I could count the number of females there on like my hands. It was just a sea of white guys in black t-shirts. And now it's changing. It's a total dynamic shift. And we are seeing a lot of other people enter the horror space. And it's making it a lot more of kind of a cultural thing that no one is willing just to kind of say, sweep us under the rug. It's getting to be much louder. And even, you were right, where it is, horror in itself is changing, because one of the things that Mr. Noel Carroll puts in his book when he's defining what a horror film is he says that it has to have a clearly defined monster, is one of his big things that he points at. And then immediately I go, okay, well, how do we then define things like May or Eyes of My Mother, or even the Babadook, where when you're looking at the monster being the protagonist and it becomes a lot more psychological, there is no longer in a lot of horror films a clearly defined monster that we can point at and be like, the Wolfman did it, or that thing over there with, no eyeballs did it. It's now a question of psychology and who is the villain in The Witch? Is it the witch?
Right.
So yeah, it gets it. We've entered a lot of kind of gray area across the board, and I rather like it here.
Same here. Psycho allegedly saved us from this, and yet here we are still talking about that. So Izzy, talking about this kind of thing, what you really seem to go for some controversial stuff in your short films. What is the thing that you get nervous talking about? Is there anything? Is there a film that you watch that feels like, that makes me nervous? It's like spiders get me, and it's a small thing. But is there something that socially, when you see it in a horror film, you're like, damn, I wish that was gone?
So you're not talking purely like a phobia, or just it can be just anything? It
can be just about anything. It's I like to think about, like, a lot of times we talk about cliches and stuff. We hate cliches. We don't really hate tropes, but most cliches were tropes that were overdone. And something that Rebekah just talked about is that horror evolves with the audience. What do you think is still being done in horror films that you're like, fuck, let's just get rid of this? This is
really dumb misogyny in slasher films is something that really pisses me off. I'm so fucking done with it. Enough. Like, how many fucking decades of that do we have to have? Come on. It's boring. Do something different.
And that's something that people point to me about slasher films all the time. About, I thought you said everything's political. I said, that's very political. Take a look at when slasher films are happening, right? And how they get violent. And everybody says, oh, well, you know, they're violent to men and women. Men usually get an axe in the head and they fall down. Women are like, ah, ah, ah. There's a picture and they're getting mauled to pieces.
They're totally dissected
Yeah.
sexually
Yeah.
and emotionally, verbally.
And if
It
their
is-
dead bodies are intact, they're shown on screen for a really long time. Usually,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there to exploit it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And, you know, it's
Very political, because the more people complained about it, especially the new feminism that was happening in the 80s at that point, the more that they complained, more Paglia came out, the nastier the movies got as a response. And so I say, yeah, absolutely, that stuff is political. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that one, because I have a love-hate with slasher films. I thought the first one, Friday the 13th, is the one that I consider the first one, even though there were earlier ones. But that was like punk rock, because it was just like, oh, everybody's still kind of bowing to Hitchcock, the little tastefulness. You can see everybody wearing a black tie while they're calling action. And then Cunningham's like, fuck, we don't have any money. Just throw blood at everything. Let's just kill everybody, kill everything, steal from everybody. And I was like, this is punk rock. And then it became this template so quickly. You know, it took 2 years, not even 2 years. And I was like, shit, something so cool just ended up dying, you know. And so anybody else on something that they'd love to see disappear?
well, you know, I'm not good on the spot. I go blank the moment you ask me anything.
The things that I now want to see disappear are happening kind of within the industry. Like even just the scripts that I am sent now, you know, through my agent or whomever, I am sent so many fucking rape revenge scripts. And anybody who knows me knows that that is the last thing I would ever make. But I find now that a lot of these will come out, like people will write them, and then they'll say, you know what, we should put a female filmmaker on it so she can speak about it. And that in itself is so damn wrong. I can't even begin to get
And they're all
into
written
it.
by men, right?
I have yet to read one written by a woman. I've got 20 written by men, but I have never received one written by a female scriptwriter.
Did they across the board have dick trauma too?
No, very few.
Christ.
I think I've read one with dick trauma. But yeah, most of them, it's all just very kind of, and some of them are still so abhorrent. Like it's still just this stuff that would have made me cringe had I seen it in prior decades. But there's now this concept that I'm seeing in Hollywood of, okay, this is some heavy shit. We should attach a female filmmaker so they can, you know, put their take in it.
So we can be sensitive.
Yeah, so we can be sensitive so they can make it okay.
Well, yeah, I think it almost gives them like the green light to do it. Like you attach a woman to it, it's like, okay, well, we're cool. We're not going to, nobody's going to say anything.
And
Tokenism.
so that's what I've seen a lot of. And I do think that there are some rape revenge films that I like. I can name a couple that I'm like, okay, that's a pretty tight little movie. I like what you're doing there. I think that there's really some smart stuff like Revenge from last year. I loved. There's a Japanese film, which is kind of like a TNA film, but at the same time, there's something going on called Freeze Me. That's a rape revenge film that I'm always like, there's something cool going on there, where it's a female who's it's still a rape revenge film, but there's something far more psychological at work. But yeah, like that is what I'm seeing right now, is a lot of kind of these misogynistic movies are still being written, but it's now this let's attach a female filmmaker to try to justify it logic, which is painstaking.
That's really interesting.
And I will say this is the thing, female filmmakers, we all talk to each other. We all know. Izzy was out here for a long time. We all get the same scripts. And so if it will happen that a company will say, let's find a female filmmaker, all of us will receive it the next day. And then we're like, is this like tokenism? We don't know. Like, we're happy to be invited to the party. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, it
Fuck
feels...
the party.
Fuck the party. We want the same shit that everybody else gets. And so that is where I'm still seeing some kind of hurdles, is still kind of like, you know, we're making strides. There's a bunch of us now, but it's still this kind of, we're getting there.
Yeah.
So.
It's really interesting that you mentioned the rape revenge films, because I in my book, I talk to people about how it's a strange thing with the newest strain of feminism that they're supporting the rape revenge films. films. And I've seen that in print a couple times. I was like, boy, when I was growing up, the most reprehensible film ever was I Spit on Your Grave. It was like Roger Ebert had this whole thing on it. And that tide has changed in a way. So I love what you're saying here, because I never think that anything's across the board, but I'm hearing this being said where it's like, yes, in the very beginning of these movies, they have this terrible thing, but there is this redemption that's happened. And so there is this, suddenly it's become popular, and it's kind of like, I know women who are big into giallo, and they're always conflicted about giallo because there is this terrible sadism that's involved in that, terrible misogyny, and yet they're transfixed by the beauty. What do you think about this feeling that you're feeling like there's a misogyny that's there, it's being written by men, yet there is support for these movies being seen more as cathartic in that fashion at the end, right?
It's still, rape revenge films are still a real slippery slope. Like I have not yet come to terms with how I feel about them. And most of the women that are horror fans that I know are still like, there's some that I'm like, okay, you did something. There's other ones that I like and I don't know why, because I still look at it and I'm like, that's totally misogynistic, but I love I Spit on Your Grave, and things like that. And then there are other ones that I feel like there's something that I consider to be feminist, but at the same time, it's an abhorrent film, like Ilsa. I love all the Ilsa movies. There's something that I can look at and go, fuck yeah, girl power. And then at the same time, I'm like, God, these are some exploited pieces of shit. So I don't know how I feel about any of this. It's still such a hard thing. Like I can look at it and say when it's done well. But yeah, it's those across the board are a difficult thing to kind of maneuver.
It's a wonderful gray area.
Yeah.
Well, part of it is that there's a glut of these films that it's like, oh, well, this is a feminist film, so let's just make 300 of them. And, you know, part of showing, I want to see women in their totality represented on screen. I don't want to see one aspect of being a woman on screen. I want to see a lot more variation, and we're not seeing a lot of variation. And I feel like one of the things that happens in genres that not in genre, in film in general, with the films that get funded, one film is successful and then a bunch of lesser films get funded because, oh, well, those will make money. And it results in this very small representation on screen, and that's not right either.
The other thing that we are definitely still battling, which you mentioned when you said representations on the screen, trans,
yes,
gay, anyone who is not white,
yes,
these we're just still not seeing them in, and it's not even horror at this point, it's just movies across the board. It is still just something that is so lacking in movies, is representing a more kind of dynamic culture than what we've had for the past 50 years in cinema. It's rough. And yeah, it's something that like I know people are working towards, but again, it's not happening fast enough. It's still, when I watch movies and I'm just like, every single person in this movie is white, it feels it's not representative of the world.
Or you start to see these films that really are pandering, because you'll get, you know, your group of 5, but then you got to make sure you have one, you know, person of color. And to me, like, or, you know, then you start playing stereotypes and caricatures, and these characters aren't even a good representation or an honest, authentic representation of you know, these people that they're portraying, and it becomes more offensive. And then I think you're doing the opposite. Like, it's not, oh, look, we're inclusive. It's like, no, you're doing it wrong.
Right. And that's actually, I'm glad that you brought that up, because one of our listeners or viewers, Noberto Aguiar, had mentioned.
Noberto!
There you go.
Oh my gosh. He was in the PhD program with me.
There you go. So
I love it when people stop by and we're all friends.
Yeah. Lack of gay characters, trans and black characters in horror films was what he popped up on. And absolutely. And I think it's funny. It's such a weird thing. You know, we talk about how subtle all of this is. Right now, everybody's talking about how racism, there are different levels of this. And, you know, we see the tip of the iceberg, but underneath there's so much that's just kind of brought into you. And somebody put a picture of a Peanuts, a still from a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. And it was, racism is subtler than you think. And it shows all the Peanuts characters, including Franklin, the black character, sitting at the table for the Thanksgiving dinner. Franklin's alone on the other side of the table, just on a little chair, and everybody else is together like a family. And then Snoopy and Charlie Brown are on the side, on the edges. And I never noticed that, but it's just one of those things that you go, you know what, we're being inclusive just by adding them in there. And it's unconscious. I don't think there was any motive to it. It's just, that's how things were done. That's as far as we can go. Right. And I think that a lot of generations, I think every generation actually goes and becomes progressive to their comfort zone end. And then the next generation has to see that and go, well, you got us here, but that's nowhere. We got to go to that next thing. I do think that horror is feeling something, you know, for as much as everybody bangs on the baby boomers, and rightfully so in many ways, they did kick down some doors halfway. And the thing is, those doors even being open halfway allows people to go a little bit further. They don't have to take that rock from all the way back here. And I think we're seeing that progression, but we're not seeing it fast enough. Another thing I wanted to bring up was that somebody, when I mentioned what about rape revenge films, and there's a level of feminism, somebody had mentioned Susie Linsenmeyer. Sorry, my eyes are terrible. Me as a survivor. I like revenge films. I can live vicariously. And that's one of the things, the Jungian world of horror.
I have heard that so many times, that those people who have been victims, who have lived through it, who have experienced it in any capacity, that these are incredibly cathartic. And that is so beautiful. I mean, that to be able to kind of live vicariously through these movies and find some type of redemption within it, it's gorgeous. So yeah, I love that element of them. But I mean, I think we all kind of do that, whether it's through rape revenge films or not, because there are nights that I want to watch Return of the Living Dead, and there are nights that I put on Martyrs. And it's all based on kind of what type of psychological cleansing I need that night.
Yeah. And I do that with heavy metal. I go to concerts, punk. I get in the mosh pit still in my 50s because it's necessary. Well, not now, obviously.
Good
so
for
now,
you.
I just run out in the woods. But the idea of kink is another place where people recapture energy that's been stolen from them through a terrible trauma. Horror does the same thing. I think a lot of the things that are considered outsider art or outsider craft tend to work on this deep work that we need to do, this shadow work that allows us. And I think that horror is always culturally working on the trauma that is happening wherever we are. And I think as a larger, generation or a larger society, horror is constantly going at it takes our slings and arrows, and it is still there for us when we need it. That's what I love about horror.
There's more of kind of directly, there's kind of a historical direct correlation towards national trauma and when horror gets more extreme. So if you look like directly after Vietnam, we see things like Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then as we push into the 1970s, shit gets wild. I mean, the 1970s was just, how can I shock you? What do I need to do? I'm going to do that. And then 5 other people will too. And then we see the same thing kind of post 9/11 and post Abu Ghraib, where we're then seeing Saw, Hostel, Captivity, even things like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Hills Have Eyes reboots are like way hyper violent. And so when people have been kind of speculating, like, what are we going to see post pandemic? That's what I always say. I'm like, we are either going to need like crazy comedies just to kind of remember how ridiculous this was, or ridiculous in the fact of like everything that we've had to endure, like being able to laugh at ourselves. Staying inside is not ridiculous. Stay the fuck inside. But, or we are all going to need some type of an emotional cleansing, and it is going to get really intense. Just because traditionally, there's actually a really good book. The name is escaping me. I will have to, Shocking Representations is a really good one that looks at kind of national trauma through horror.
We need to have a list. When this is over, we have to email each other these links and put that on the YouTube page. And
at the American Nightmare doc.
Oh, that's so good. Is it Stephen Smith who did that? I can't
No,
remember.
this is Adam Lowenstein, Shocking Representations, Historical Trauma, National Cinema, and the Modern Horror Film.
Lowenstein's great. I remember
And
him talking about Night of the Living Dead at his bar mitzvah.
Yeah, it tracks exactly what I was talking about, how anytime we have this kind of national trauma, we feel kind of the cathartic need through horror.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I love that you brought up Captive. I think it was Captive or Captivity. Was that
Captivity?
The name?
That was, yeah.
Roland Joffe, the Killing Fields director, did that movie, which made my jaw drop. I was like,
wait, I thought Courtney Solomon did that movie. Hold on,
take a look. Maybe it's two different ones, because
I think
Roland Joffe did a really insane torture porn film, and it's so interesting because he did Year Zero. He chronicled.
Oh no, he did this. It was produced by Courtney Solomon. Okay, but yeah, it's Roland Joffe. Screenplay by Larry Cohen. What the fuck?
How did I not know that? Holy shit! So
screenplay by Larry Cohen.
What an amazing thing. So it always blew my mind, because here's Roland Joffe, who did The Killing Fields, which was this moment when Hollywood takes a look at Year Zero, Cambodia. You know, after we leave in Cambodia, they kill everybody. And so he was already talking about that. But that movie goes up for an Oscar. And then we're in a nastier time, an uglier time, where the complexity of our complexion, that is, well, let's talk about what torture really is, instead of we hate torture. You know, now we're bargaining on what torture is. We get the movies we fucking deserve. You know, we get the Roland Joffe we fucking deserve. So anyway, I know that you guys have been wonderful sticking around a little bit longer. I know some of you have to really go. So I want to have like a lightning round. Talk about your comfort horror films, the ones that you love to curl up to, and then tell us what you're up to and what
I want to hear what everybody's up to and what's coming up next.
Who wants to start? Izzy.
Sure. Horror comfort foods. Basket Case, Halloween 3, Night of the Creeps, RoboCop, which I consider horror, so too bad.
Yes.
Jaws.
Fair.
What's that?
Fair.
Yeah, right? Jaws, I just picked up the new 4K release of Jaws, and it's so beautiful. It looks better than it's ever looked. There's so many cool extras with Spielberg and everyone else talking, producers and whatnot, actors. It is shocking how gorgeous this film is now. And I've seen it, billions of times. What else? I just picked up Reanimator, finally, from Arrow. And, Vincent Price is always a comfort in any film he's in.
Yes.
Loves Roger Corman, AIP, Poe picks. They're just chef's kiss. Let's see. In terms of what I'm up to, I am spinning my wheels being a creative that can't really be on set right now. And so it really does suck. There's some writing going on. There's some soft pre-production / development stuff going on, but nothing too exciting right now. Still playing festivals with a couple different films virtually, of course. Like The Obliteration of the Chickens is still playing. Disco Graveyard is playing.
I so love Obliteration.
Oh,
same.
Terrifying.
I smiled so much. I just remember when it came in, I was like, yes, what am I looking at? I don't know. I love it.
This is my weird side coming out. Like, it's either
good.
reality
I love your
narrative,
weird side.
reality narrative based horror, or like what the fuck cult stuff.
It's your Japanese period. It's a great experiment.
It might be. I wrote something called Meet Friend the other day, and then developed it with my husband. It's just a short for now. It could be a web series. I don't really know what to do with it, but it's gonna be fucking weird and hilarious and all kinds of wrong.
Nice.
And so that's what I'm up to right now.
Wonderful. How about Shayna?
Definitely my horror comfort food is The Changeling.
Yay.
I love that film so much.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, and it terrifies me every single time I watch it, and also makes me feel better about absolutely everything. So And then in terms of what I'm doing actually quite a bit and nothing at the same time. So when the pandemic hit, I had a really clear schedule for finishing an observational documentary, was also restructuring a horror feature script, and I've written a memoir, which is a lot of fun, and I don't know what's going to happen with it. But all of those things sort of have taken a back seat, and it's good that I can work on all of those still when I have time and energy, because they don't involve being on set. But I am also supposed to be in pre-production for a short, and am in limbo with that, and which is frustrating because I was also in limbo with a different short last year. And so this feels like the way of the future, at least in the short term. So when I can, I am writing and editing.
Well, thank you for talking about that. It's the cognitive dissonance that we're feeling right now. This is the apocalypse with takeout food. It's just impossible to put your head around this kind of thing. And so the idea of limbo and hurry up and wait. I know I do want to talk to both you and Rebekah very quickly after we talk to Rebekah, because you're both in a very interesting situation as educators and parents. And that has to be a true limbo that you're in right now.
Oh, God damn. I mean, and I'm sure that it's a struggle for everybody who's a parent right now. But even like they just announced that my kids were staying home at least until October. We're online. And part of me is like, well, of course, I don't want them bringing COVID home. They're like little disease petri dishes anyway. My kids are young. They touch everything. And so I'm like, I don't want them bringing shit home. But at the same time, like part of me just goes, oh, like my husband and I have been, because he's a screenwriter as well. He mostly works as a script doctor. Like he works a lot with some major networks that put out a lot of films, which, yeah, you can probably figure out. But he does a lot of script rewrites for them. And so we've had to kind of split our time where I will work from like whenever my classes are, and then sometimes he's up till 2 a.m. So we're both still putting in 8 hours, but one of us constantly has to be monitoring the kids who are screaming in the background right now while I'm doing this. And like, we are like high five each other as he's coming off the shift and I'm going on. And we're lucky if we get 5 hours of sleep a night on most nights. So yeah. It's a trip. Shayna, are you doing the same thing?
Yeah, I'm lucky my kids are older. And I also, but yeah, I also don't care or don't believe that they are going to be falling behind.
I don't either.
I'm not concerned about what they do. I'm more interested in sort of fostering their individual needs and self-direction, and their kids that struggle in school anyway. So just trying to manage and make sure that they're okay, because we're super sequestered. Like we don't see anybody.
Yeah, neither do we.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's hard on them, but they get it. And yeah, it's hard. They're old enough though that I can tell them, you know, you can't do X and such, but it's still, I don't have an office door. And so they can still, and we're home together all the time. And so even though they know that I'm working, they can come in and go, hi. And then it's like, if I'm writing, it's gone.
Yeah.
And they don't mean any harm. They're just wanting to say, hey. And it's.
I get it. I have an office door, but it doesn't matter. Like they come in whenever. I'm surprised. I hear a vacuum going. I have no idea what's going on downstairs right now.
You don't have any urns laying around, right?
No, that would be. I mean,
yeah. How old are yours, Vanessa?
So I have an 11-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter.
Okay.
Yeah,
I keep thinking like teenagers would be worse, but I do have to say like the one who has taken it the hardest out of everybody, my 7-year-old, she's taken it hard, but I can at least sit her down and explain like there's a virus out there.
Yeah.
You don't want to get it. Mommy has asthma, really fucking bad. We're not going to risk it.
Right.
But my 4-year-old has no idea what's going on. And that one has been the worst because it's things like, and it comes out in passing comments, which again, it's all the psychological stuff.
Yes.
I'm curious how this is gonna, be coming out later. But it's things like we were watching a TV show a couple of days ago and I'm sitting on the couch with him and it was about friendship. And all of a sudden he looks at me and he goes, Mommy, I don't have any friends anymore, do I? And all of a sudden, like, my heart breaks and I'm like, oh no, buddy, you got tons of friends. We just can't be around him. Like he just doesn't, it's not processing the same. So yeah, it's
well, we've thrown screen time restrictions out the window because
gone.
That's the only way that they can communicate and kind of entertain themselves. I mean, even my son, who I'm like, oh God, he's playing video games like all day, but he's talking to his friends and that's kind of how he can hang out with them. So it's like, yeah, play Fortnite. I don't care.
Yeah, my 4-year-old lives vicariously through Animal Crossing right now, where he gets excited and he's like, Mommy, I caught fishes today, and then I went to this thing, and I'm like, dude, that's something good for you. So
yeah.
And it doesn't even have to do with kids. It's just another entity. Like my wife is at risk, so I don't see a lot of people. Yet I'm a writer, right? I've been working at home for the longest time. The last couple months, it's like she's not even trying to bother me. Not even. It's just almost like there's a mass weight in the house that wasn't there before. And somehow that changes everything. The dynamic changes because there's just this whole different existence. There's even just the timeliness of, oh, she'll be home by 4:15. There is no 4:15 anymore. And what I'm finding is that I'm losing my scheduling skills. I used to be a crack scheduler.
Yeah. We have no bedtime anymore. I'm like, whenever everybody's fucking tired, I don't know. I'm still working. So just knock yourselves out. Watch whatever you want. Like it's anarchy here. But somehow it's become a pattern, which is weird. Like we've fallen into a pattern of anarchy.
Well, and I don't even have a good reason. I mean, my son, I was like, you got to go to bed. It's 11 o'clock. And he's like, why? I'm like,
exactly.
I don't have an answer. I guess stay up.
Yeah.
Your teeth will fall out at 18.
Yeah, I'm like, because I don't know. I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for sticking around. We could talk all night, and I know that that's always a nightmare. But I do thank you all for sticking it out and bringing your insights. It's really a joy. One of the reasons that we do this is because we're missing this. We're missing seeing everybody at film festivals and at conventions and just having these wonderful, juicy conversations. We don't want it to be an interview show. This isn't taking your vegetables. This is to be fun. This is the ice cream sundae. And thank you very much for sharing an ice cream sundae with us today. And for anybody that's out there listening and still hanging in with us all this time, I want you to say we'll see you next week and stay hellbent.